Hello, today I'm looking at Majjhima number 138, and that's entitled the UddessaVibhanga Sutta. Now, in the translations I look at Bhikkhu Bodhi and the one by Thanissaro, Bhikkhu Thanissaro. It's either called the exposition of a summary or an analysis of the statement. And again, in transcribing or interpreting this sutta, I've flip-flopped between the two translations and used the one with sort of the grammar and words made a bit more sense to me. Anyway, now the location is Savatthi in Jetta's Grove in Anathapindika's Park. And the persons mentioned are Buddha, or the Blessed One, and the Venerable Mahakachana, and also an assembly of monks, or the Sangha. And the sutta opens with Buddha speaking to the assembly of monks. Monks, I will teach you a statement and its analysis. And Buddha says, a monk should examine things in such a way that while he is examining them, his consciousness is not distracted and scattered externally, nor stuck internally, and by not clinging, he does not become agitated. By examining thus, for him, there is no origination of suffering, there is no seed for the conditions of future birth, aging, death, or stress. Buddha then returned to his dwelling. So that was the statement made. Now, without any detailed explanation, the monks were at a loss. So they went to Mahakachana, who was held in high esteem by the Sangha, and after exchanging courtesies, asked Mahakachana about what Buddha had said. Now, initially, Mahakachana admonishes the monks for not directly asking Buddha for an explanation when they had the chance. For coming to me, i.e. Mahakachana, is like a man looking for the heartwood of a tree, passing over the visible heartwood and being content with the branches and leaves. For Buddha, he knows he is the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning. But the monks reply, being implored by the monks to provide an explanation, Mahakachana accedes. And he starts by saying, consciousness called distracted and scattered externally, that's what Buddha described it as. Here, when a monk has seen a form with the eye, if his consciousness follows after the sign of the form, he is tied and shackled by gratification to the sign of the form, is fettered by the fetter of gratification in the sign of the form. Then his consciousness is called distracted and scattered externally. So I suppose seeing something nice and going, oh, that's nice, and being distracted by it when you may be supposed to be sitting there meditating, such like. The same, and he repeats the same analogy for hearing a sound with the ear is a distraction, or can be a distraction. Smelt an odour with the nose, tasted a flavour with the tongue, touched a tangible with the body, cognized a mind object with the mind. Mahakachana goes on. Conversely, consciousness is not scattered and distracted when seeing a form with the eye, if his consciousness does not follow after the sign of the form, is not tied by gratification to the sign of the form, is not fettered by the fetter of gratification in the sign of the form. Then his consciousness is called not distracted and scattered externally. So see it and pass on. There's no consequence. So sort of, I put a note to myself that It's a reminder of the previous sutta, number 137, the concept of atamayata, which states there is no that. So there is this something, but there's no that. So there's no sort of consequence of seeing or smelling or tasting something. Mahakachana then goes on to repeat the experience perceived by the other sense organs. So if cognized by the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. If his consciousness does not follow the received stimulus, the consciousness is not shackled by gratification in the sign of the mind object, is not fettered by the fetter of gratification in the sign of the mind object. Then his consciousness is called not distracted and scattered externally. Mahakachana continues, explaining how the mind can be stuck internally. When entering upon and dwelling in the first jhana, the meditation step, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So that's the standard definition of how to achieve the first jhana. What is the first jhana? If his consciousness follows after the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, is tied and shackled by gratification in the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, then his mind is said to be stuck internally. So my comment is, yes, this. So it's such a pleasant feeling that one tries to stay with it, and as Buddha says, stuck internally. He goes on, when a monk enters upon and abides in the second jhana, which has self-confidence and singleness of mind without applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of concentration. If his consciousness follows after this rapture and pleasure born of concentration, then his mind is called stuck internally. So again, I put, yes, the ecstasy experience is hard to pass through. I thought the mind saying, stay here. So stuck internally. Mahakachana goes on. In the third jhana, with the fading away of rapture, the monk abides in equanimity or calmness, mindful and fully aware. If his consciousness follows after the equanimity, then his mind is called stuck internally. So same again, stopped at that point, the meditation steps. Again, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, a monk enters upon the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity, calmness. If his consciousness follows after the neither pain nor pleasure, is tied and shackled by gratification in the neither pain nor pleasure, is fettered by the fetter of gratification in the neither pain nor pleasure, then his mind is called stuck internally. And so, how is the mind called not stuck internally? In the first jhana, if his consciousness does not follow after the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, and is not tied and shackled by the gratification in the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, nor fettered by the fetter of gratification in the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, then the mind is called not stuck internally. So Mahakachana then goes on to repeat the instruction for the second, third and fourth jhana, how not to get stuck, i.e. to move on. There then follows information where there is agitation due to clinging. Where an untaught ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones, is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, has no regard for true men and their Dhamma, regards material form as self, or self as possessed of material form, or material form as in self, or self as in material form, And when his form changes and becomes unstable, with this change, his consciousness is preoccupied with the change. An agitated mental state arises, born of the preoccupation of change of material form, and remains obsessing his mind. He is anxious, distressed, concerned, and due to clinging, becomes agitated. So that's, I think it's illustrating so that the change in the mental state through the meditation process sort of can be a bit freaky if a person is tied to their material form. So he regards feeling as self. This is still back with the what's it called? The untaught ordinary person. He regards feeling as self. He regards perception as self. He regards formation as self. He regards consciousness as self. I.e., that's all bound up with the aggregates or the khandhas. Or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. His consciousness changes and becomes unstable. Because of the change and instability of consciousness, his consciousness is preoccupied with the change. Agitated states of mind arise, born of preoccupation with the change of consciousness, remaining obsessing the mind. And because his mind is obsessed, he is anxious, distressed, and concerned, and due to clinging, he becomes agitated. This is how there is agitation due to clinging. And how is there non-agitation due to non-clinging? Here, a well-taught noble disciple who has regard for noble ones, is skilled and disciplined in their Dhamma, does not regard material form as self, or self as possessed of material form, or material form as in self, or self as in material form. His form changes and is unstable, but his consciousness doesn't. Because of the change and instability of form, his consciousness doesn't alter in accordance with the change in form. His mind is not consumed with any agitation born from an alteration in accordance with the change in form, or coming from the arising of unskillful mental qualities. And because he has awareness, and because his awareness is not preoccupied, he feels neither fearful, anxious, or concerned. And due to non-clinging, he does not become agitated. He does not regard feeling as self, perception as self, formation as self, consciousness as self, again the aggregates, or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. His consciousness changes and is unstable, but his consciousness doesn't. Because of the change or instability of consciousness, his consciousness doesn't alter in accordance with the change in consciousness. His mind is not consumed with any agitation born from an alteration in accordance with the change in consciousness, or coming from the arising of unskillful qualities. And because his awareness is not obsessed, he is not anxious, distressed, or concerned, and due to non-clinging, he does not become agitated. That is how there is non-agitation due to non-clinging. Mahakachana then summarizes by saying this is what the Blessed One meant, when the Blessed One said, a monk or bhikkhu should examine things in such a way that while he is examining them, his consciousness is not distracted and scattered externally, nor stuck internally, and by not clinging, he does not become agitated. If his consciousness is not distracted and scattered externally, nor stuck internally, and if by not clinging he does not become agitated, then for him there is no origination of suffering, of birth, aging and death in the future. Mahakajana then suggests the monks go to Buddha and verify what was explained, which is what the monks do. And after being told, after Buddha is told what Mahakajana says, Buddha says, Mahakajana is wise, and if you monks had asked me the meaning of what I said, I would have explained it the same way as Mahakajana. Such is the meaning, and so you should remember it. This is what the Blessed One said, and the monks were delighted with the Blessed One's words. And that's the end of Majjhima Nikaya number 138, the UddessaVibhanga Sutta. Thanks for watching.